The wind howled through the trees behind the white panel house on Alder Creek Road. It had sat empty for years, its porch sagging under the weight of rain and silence. When the new family moved in, exhausted, hopeful, trying to outrun a shadow, the old dog next door perked up for the first time in months. 2 weeks later, K-9 Officer Scout barked just once inside the child's upstairs bedroom. One sharp, guttural cry, directed at the wall. What they found hidden inside would unravel trust, expose betrayal, and leave seasoned detectives utterly silent. Stay close. This one doesn't let go easy. The house smelled like old lumber and forgotten years. It sat 3 miles outside the edge of Holton, a farming town in northern Minnesota where winters were long and secrets froze deep. From the outside, the home looked quiet, a 2-story frame with paint peeled thin and gutters rusted through. Ivy strangled the east side, and a crooked wooden fence barely held its line in the backyard. But to Aaron and Cal Whitaker, it was hope, a reset, a chance to leave Milwaukee behind and start fresh with their daughter, Lila. Lila was 6, pale, often silent, with a habit of standing too still for too long. It was Lila who first complained about the wall. "We're not supposed to be here," she said softly on the 3rd night, fingers twisting the hem of her shirt. She stood in the middle of her room, barefoot on the warped pine floor, eyes fixed on the east wall. Aaron stopped unpacking the last box. "What do you mean, sweetie?" "There's someone behind it." Aaron followed her gaze to the blank stretch of drywall. Nothing strange. No cracks. No stains. No sound. The room was chilly, but the whole house ran cold without insulation. She forced a gentle smile. "It's just settling. Old houses do that." Lila didn't move. "He doesn't like me." By the 7th day, Cal had returned to late shifts at the lumber mill. He left before sunrise and came back past midnight, thick with sawdust and whiskey. Aaron handled the house alone, painting, fixing the faucet, setting mousetraps, trying to believe this was a better life. Lila grew quieter. Sometimes Aaron would pass her room and find her standing there again, facing that wall, whispering, listening. She wanted to believe it was imagination, that Lila was still recovering from the city, that the brokenness of what happened in Milwaukee hadn't followed them here. Then the scratching started. It came faint at first, soft ticks like fingernails under drywall. At night, when the wind blew east and the trees tapped against the roofline, Aaron would hear it. One scratch, then another, always from that same part of Lila's wall. She asked Cal to listen once. He waved it off, half drunk, grumbling about raccoons or bats. Aaron didn't push. She started sleeping in Lila's room, on a thin mattress by the closet, not for Lila's sake, for hers. On the 10th night, Scout barked. Scout was a 10-year-old retired K-9 who belonged to their neighbor, Roy McKinney. Roy was a widower in his 70s with a bad hip and a better shotgun. Scout had been trained for search and rescue, explosives, and narcotics. But now, he mostly dozed in the sun, tail twitching at birds. That night, Scout pushed through the half-open back door and padded inside. Roy followed, calling after him. Aaron met them at the base of the stairs, startled. "Sorry, Miss Whitaker," Roy said, breath short. "He don't usually do that. Just barge right in." Scout stood frozen halfway up the stairs. Then, as Aaron called for him to come down, he barked once, a sharp, deep sound that echoed through the hall, and dropped something heavy in her gut. He stared up toward Lila's room, toward that wall. Detective Helena Cruz wasn't supposed to be working. She'd put in for family leave after her mother's 2nd stroke. But Roy McKinney had trained Scout himself and personally called her. "You owe me," he said, voice tight. "This dog hasn't barked in 6 years. Not once. And not like that." She drove out that same evening. Cruz didn't look like a detective. She wore flannel, boots, and a faded parka that made her blend in with the locals. But she walked like someone trained to scan every doorway and window she passed. Always watching. Always measuring. Aaron greeted her with nervous hands and a dry throat. "I know this sounds crazy," Aaron whispered as they walked upstairs. "But my daughter, she's been acting different since we got here." She talks to the wall. Cruz's eyes flicked toward the scuffed hallway trim. Which wall? In her room, east side. Cruz stepped inside and stopped cold. The wallpaper had been torn back near the baseboard. The drywall was discolored, just a shade darker than the rest. Not water damage, not mold, something else. She leaned close, ran a gloved hand over the surface. Then she knocked. The wall gave a hollow thud. An hour later, Roy returned with tools. Cal hadn't come home yet. Lila was asleep at Roy's place, curled on a couch beside Scout. Cruz stood by silently as Roy cut a careful square into the drywall. A flashlight cast white light across the exposed cavity inside. What they saw stopped them both. Inside the wall was a narrow compartment, hand-built, lined with insulation like a soundproof chamber. And in the corner, wedged tight against a wooden frame, was a small, filthy blanket, a torn stuffed rabbit, and a child's plastic bracelet. No bones, but definitely signs of occupancy. Cruz radioed it in. They photographed everything, bagged every item. The bracelet was worn smooth, pale blue with a cracked unicorn charm. The rabbit was missing an eye. There were strands of what looked like hair stuck in the insulation, matted and dark. The blanket smelled of mildew and something else, something sour and human. Roy stood behind her, jaw clenched. "I built this place in '93, he said finally. "Framed it myself. But I didn't build that." Aaron stood in the doorway, white-knuckled and shaking. "Who did?" Cruz didn't answer. She was already dialing the missing persons database. The wall had been sealed for years. The age of the items placed the chambers used somewhere between the late '90s and early 2000s. Long enough for records to blur and people to forget. But Cruz didn't forget the Becker girl, Madeline Becker, 8 years old, vanished from her backyard in 1999, lived less than 4 miles from here. The bracelet matched the description from the report. Cruz stared at it now, sealed in evidence. She remembered the father, Dennis Becker, stoic, blamed the mother, drank himself to death in 2007. The case had gone cold. Aaron hovered nearby. "You think a girl lived in our wall?" "Not lived," Cruz said quietly. "Was kept." That night, Aaron stayed up. She paced the kitchen while Cal stumbled in at 2:12 a.m., reeking of whiskey and sawdust, bleeding from a cut on his hand. "What happened to your hand?" she asked. He waved it off. "Nailed it on a crate. Don't worry about it." "You know a girl might have been hidden in Lila's wall?" she said. He didn't even flinch. Just grabbed a beer, popped it open, and sank into the old couch. "You think I had something to do with that?" "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Silence stretched. The beer hissed as he tipped it back. The next morning, Cruz returned with a forensic crew. She questioned Aaron gently, took notes on Lila's behavior, measured the bedroom dimensions, all while Scout waited near the stairs, calm but alert. Then something unexpected happened. Scout barked again, not at the same wall. This time it was the floor. Cruz dropped to one knee. "Hold him." A junior officer stepped in. Scout tensed, but allowed it. Cruz tapped her knuckles along the floorboard beneath where the wall chamber had been discovered. 3 boards in, the sound changed. "Hollow." Roy fetched the crowbar. Cruz lifted the boards one by one until a small crawl space opened beneath. The air that rose was cold and stale. She pointed the flashlight down. There, resting on the dirt floor, was a single Polaroid photo. A child's face. Not Madeline. Different features. Same age. And in the background, visible behind her, a man's silhouette near the edge of frame. Cruz felt her chest tighten. It was the first clue that there hadn't just been one girl. She sealed the scene, ordered DNA testing. Her mind churned. Someone had built chambers. Not once. More than once. Possibly over years. Which meant the house hadn't just been a home. It had been a trap. And someone, maybe still in town, had set it. Detective Cruz hadn't slept. She drove into Holton before sunrise and pulled her truck into the parking lot behind the courthouse annex. The Polaroid was sealed in an evidence bag beside her on the passenger seat. She kept looking at it. The shadow of a man behind the girl. No clear features, But the frame of his shoulders, the posture, the outline of the ears, it felt familiar. Not to her, but maybe to someone else. The girl in the photo couldn't have been more than 6. Auburn curls, freckles, pale lips, eyes puffy like she'd been crying. The photo had no date, no identifying marks. But the room behind her had the same wallpaper as the bedroom in the Whitaker house, just older, floral pattern, yellowed at the corners. She stared at it again. The wallpaper had been replaced sometime in the early 2000s, which meant the second girl had been inside the house too, and someone had captured it. By noon, the forensics team confirmed the obvious. Hair fibers found inside the wall matched Madeleine Becker's mitochondrial DNA. The crawl space held traces of multiple biological profiles, none of which matched Aaron, Cal, or Lila. One partial fingerprint was pulled from the back of the photo. Not enough for identification, but enough to prove this wasn't isolated. 2 girls, Cruz told Sheriff Lowry that afternoon. Same house, roughly the same age. At least one survived long enough to be photographed. Lowry sighed heavily, rubbing the bridge of his nose. We don't have the budget for a major investigation. We do now, Cruz replied. If that man in the picture is who I think it is, this goes federal. You think it's Becker? Lowry looked up sharply. No, she said. I think it's someone who used to wear a badge. Roy McKinney stared at the photo longer than anyone else had. He sat on his porch with a wool blanket over his knees, scalp by his feet. When Cruz handed it to him, he didn't speak for nearly a minute. I know that wallpaper, he murmured. Had to scrape it off myself during a remodel. You ever rent that place out? Roy nodded slowly. Once, back in '98. Family moved in for 7 months. Real quiet. Man, wife, little boy. Don't remember their names. Paid in cash. Cruz leaned forward. You got any records? Nope, he said. Didn't run it official. Just needed help with taxes after Helen died. You remember the man? He closed his eyes, trying. Tall. Pale. Liked to fix things. He patched the roof once without being asked. Never talked much. Any photos? Letters? Old receipts? No, Roy shook his head. But I remember his voice. Back at the house, Erin tried to hold herself together. Lila wouldn't sleep in her room anymore. She stopped speaking entirely, except in short nods or gestures. Erin felt the weight of it pressing against her. Whatever evil had lived behind that wall, whatever darkness had watched her daughter sleep, it hadn't been sealed away. It had been waiting. She started tearing up floorboards in the hallway herself. Cal hadn't come home in 2 nights. No texts, no calls. Erin knew the pattern. This wasn't new. When pressure came down, he disappeared into bottles and barns. Cruz found him in a shed behind the mill. Half passed out, grease on his jeans, empty flask beside his boot. What the hell is happening? He muttered, rubbing his eyes. We found another photograph, Cruz said. Same house, different girl. He looked up, squinting. You think I had something to do with that? No, Cruz said, but I think you're hiding something. He snorted. Lady, everyone's hiding something. Back at the department, Cruz reviewed the old Becker file again. She noticed something she hadn't before. A note from the original investigator. Child reported discomfort being around local handyman Martin. Worked seasonal jobs, left town in '97. No further leads. She searched the employment records. Nothing under Martin. No full name. No driver's license on file. Just a ghost. 3 days later, DNA confirmed a second match. The girl in the photo was identified as Haley Trevors. Reported missing in 2001. Lived in Cloverdale, just 2 towns over. Her case had been dismissed as a probable parental kidnapping. Her mother died in a car crash 6 months later, and her father was never found. Until now. His name was Martin Trevors. Martin had changed his name in 2002. Moved south. Then again. No digital trail. But one photo from an old employee newsletter, Holton Lumber, spring of 1997, showed a younger Martin smiling beside 2 new hires. One of them was Cal Whitaker. Cruz stared at the photo. Her stomach turned cold. Same posture. Same height. Same era. Cal had worked with Martin. Had lied about it. The question now wasn't whether he knew the man. It was whether he had helped him. Erin sat at the kitchen table, holding Lila's unicorn bracelet in one hand and a cup of cold tea in the other. Her eyes were bloodshot. Her jaw was locked. Cruz approached gently. Did Cal ever mention someone named Martin Trevors? No, Erin said. Why? Because he worked with him and didn't tell you. Erin looked down at the bracelet. Her voice dropped. You think he helped do something? I think he knew something, Cruz said, and chose not to speak. Later that night, Roy came by. He handed Cruz a small box wrapped in canvas. I went through the attic, he said quietly. Found this behind a beam. Never seen it before. Inside the box were 20 Polaroids. Children, each one in the same bedroom, each with a date scrawled on the back. Some of the faces Cruz recognized, some she didn't. But in every one of them, that same man's silhouette stood in the background. And in 2 of them, Cal was visible, not as the captor, but as someone standing beside him, holding a toolbox. Cruz had seen monsters before, but betrayal from the inside, it had a different weight, a different sickness. She drove to the edge of town where the old grain silo stood. Cal's truck was parked in the shadows. She found him behind the silo, half buried in straw and silence. He didn't run. You were there, Cruz said. In those photos. Cal said nothing. You helped him build those walls. He rubbed his eyes. I didn't know what he was doing. I thought it was insulation, soundproofing for a baby. Then why'd you never speak up? He looked away. Because I did know. Deep down I knew something wasn't right. He took a slow breath. He told me the rooms were for his kid. Said she screamed at night. I helped build one. Then he left town. I never saw him again. Cruz held up the photo of Madeline Becker. She screamed too. Cal closed his eyes. Back at the station, Cruz made the call. A nationwide manhunt for Martin Trevors was initiated. He'd changed names again. She was sure of it. Maybe he was dead. Maybe not. But the house told a story. And now the country would hear it. Roy stood with Scout at the edge of the yard the next morning, watching workers tear out the walls. Erin and Lila were moving out. Lila had spoken a full sentence again for the first time in days. I want the wall gone. Cruz stood beside them. You think this is over? Erin asked. Cruz didn't answer right away. Walls don't bury evil, she said. They just hold it until someone finally listens. And it had taken a single bark to break the silence. The walls were down now. Erin watched as a Cruz carried out sections of drywall, splintered studs, and entire panels of soundproof insulation. The house looked like an open wound, bare and exposed. She stood on the porch holding Lila close, the girl's small fingers wrapped tightly around her mother's wrist. Lila wouldn't go near her room, wouldn't look at it. But when Scout came by again, something changed. The old K9 climbed the porch steps slowly, hips stiff but nose twitching. Lila reached out and touched his ear. Then she whispered. He heard them too. Erin blinked. What baby? But Lila said nothing more. Detective Cruz stood in the exposed bedroom, surrounded by what was left of the hidden cavity. Her gloves were on. The photo of Cal and Martin still burned in her mind. She examined the final compartment, discovered behind a row of warped bookshelves. It was even smaller than the others. A single square, ventilation tubing rigged to pull air in from the attic, a water bottle, a rusted spoon, and, tucked in a filthy pillowcase, what looked like a journal. She knelt and opened it carefully. The handwriting was shaky, childlike, faded, but legible. July 14th. His boots are heavy. They hurt my ears. I stay quiet. July 28th. He said my name wrong again. I don't correct him anymore. August 3rd. He says I'll forget my parents. I won't. August 19th. I heard another girl crying. I tried to talk. He hit the wall. Cruz turned the page. The final entry was a single word written over and over. Remember. At the station, Cruz sat with the FBI liaison, showing a new journal alongside the Polaroids. The timeline stretches too far for this to have been just one man, she said. He may have moved, but someone stayed, maintained it, kept it quiet. You think the owner knew? The agent asked. No, Cruz replied, but someone else did. Someone in town. Someone who had reason to keep it buried. The agent nodded. We're digging into deeds, names, associates. And Cal, the agent added. He's not going anywhere. Cal sat in a holding cell, head in hands. He hadn't asked for a lawyer. Cruz stood outside the bars and watched him for nearly a minute before speaking. You had chances, she said, to say something, to warn someone, but you let it fester. I didn't know, he said, voice raw. You suspected. He didn't deny it. He made me part of it, he whispered, without me knowing, and by the time I did, I couldn't undo it. Cruz's voice stayed cold. Yes, you could have. You just didn't want to blow up your life. He looked up, eyes rimmed with red. I thought if I ignored it long enough, it would die in the walls. Outside the room, Scout barked once more. Cruz turned to Roy, who stood behind him, silent. I need you to think again, she said. Who else could have known? Roy's eyes darkened. There was one man Martin always hung around back then. Younger. Did odd jobs. No one paid much attention to him. Name. Frank Jensen. Worked at the junkyard out past Ridge Road. Cruz paused. She knew Frank Jensen, and he hadn't left town. The junkyard looked like a graveyard for rusted machines. Cruz drove out alone. Jensen wasn't hard to find. He sat in a lawn chair near the back of the lot, drinking a gas station soda, radio humming an old country tune. When he saw Cruz, his expression didn't change. You come about the house, he said. That was all it took. The arrest was quiet. Jensen didn't fight. But his house, 2 trailers welded together with tarps, held dozens more photos, shoes, toys, drawings, and 2 newspaper clippings of girls labeled forgotten. He had been watching, recording, helping. He was the one who had stayed behind. Martin Trevors was a predator, but Frank Jensen was a keeper. At the edge of town, Erin packed the last box. The house would be demolished. She stood in the empty doorway and stared at the place that had almost swallowed her child. She'd seen too many signs, heard too many whispers. But like Cal, she hadn't wanted to believe it. Now she couldn't ignore it. She knelt beside Lila. Do you feel better now? Lila looked up. Her voice was small. He's gone. That night, Detective Cruz stood in the backyard with Roy and Scout. You think we'll ever find Martin? Roy asked. Cruz didn't answer right away. We'll find what's left of him, she said. Maybe the dog already has. Scout stood still, ears perked toward the woods. Listening. Later, in her truck, Cruz unfolded the journal again. The entries haunted her, not just the fear, but the strength between the lines. Whoever that girl was, she had survived long enough to write, to think, to remember. She stared at the last word. Remember. The next week, the walls came down. The earth under the house was dug out, tested, and turned. No more cries. No more silence. Just dirt and sky. But in the corner of the yard, near where Scout first barked, they found a second crawl space. This one held bones. Small, fragile, wrapped in a blue blanket. There would be names now, closure, answers, and grief. Erin and Lila moved to the next county. Lila began therapy. Slowly, she returned to painting, talking, sleeping through the night. She drew one last picture before they left. It showed a house broken open, with a black dog standing in front of it. And behind the dog, faint in pencil, the shadows of children walking into the light. Detective Cruz kept the photo on her desk. Some cases didn't end. They just echoed. But sometimes, if someone listened closely, really listened, a single bark could break years of silence. And a wall, once meant to hide, could finally reveal the truth.